this video, I'm going to talk about Japanese philosophy of asking 5 whys to every problem and using that philosophy, that technique to get to the root of our problems in GMAT preparation. So the philosophy is that when you ask one why with respect to a problem, you generally get a very superficial answer. So you have to ask a series of whys to get to the root of a problem. So let me take an example. I recently had one session in which we did quants together. So I had already shared the questions with the student. So he had written his solutions and we were discussing it during the session. So there was one number properties question. It was a data sufficiency question. So there are two statements in data sufficiency question. And the question was about prime factorization. So on both the statements, he was supposed to just apply the concept of prime factorization. So on the second statement, he had perfectly applied the concept of prime factorization. So logic was correct, everything was fine with respect to statement 2. With respect to statement 1, he did not apply prime factorization, rather he came up with some weird logic. I'm calling that weird because the logic was not sensible, was not correct. So on the first statement, he had applied some weird logic, but on the second statement, it was all fine. So I asked him, why did you not do the first one the same way? Because it had to be done the same way. So why did you not do it the same way? He said, it just didn't strike me. Okay, so you can see my first why led to this answer, that it didn't strike me. So a lot of people actually just end here. Okay, why did you not do it correctly? Okay, the right thing didn't strike me. Okay, so then how is it going to help you? Okay, I'll be more careful in the future. That's the takeaway, that's the learning you have. Okay, I'll be more careful. So on every question you get wrong, you have the simple takeaway. Okay, I'll be more careful. We have been learning a lot about being more careful, but it's not helping you because it's very superficial. You're just not analyzing, you're just saying, okay, it just didn't click me. So what happened there was, then I asked him, okay, why didn't it strike you? And it's a very uncomfortable question. Okay, and I could sense that he was really tensed. That he was like, what is this question? It didn't strike me. Why didn't it strike me? How do I know why it didn't strike me? So, but he was sincere. He kept thinking about it, and I was also adamant. So I would not give up on the question. So he thought about it, and after, I'm not sure, 30, 40, 50 seconds, he said, okay, if I had spent 10 more seconds on it, it would have struck me. I would have gotten it right. Okay, so you didn't spend enough time on it. Okay, so then the takeaway is that, okay, in future I'm going to spend more time on it. Right? So that's the way you go. But my question continued. So why didn't you spend those extra 10 seconds on this? Now, again, more tension in the air. Why did I not spend those extra 10 seconds? But he thought about it. I think he spent about 2, 3, 4 minutes thinking about why he did not spend those extra 10 seconds on that statement. Then he said, well, you can see that the first one is a little more complex. And yeah, I could see that the first one was more complex than the second one. So I agreed, yeah, the first one is more complex. Then he thought about it. Essentially, then he came up with this understanding that the first one was complex. So he felt uncomfortable around it. He felt a little overwhelmed is the word he used. So he felt overwhelmed, and so there was discomfort within, and he didn't want to face that discomfort. So he had a tendency to rush. Okay, so he then picked up whatever logic first came to his mind and he just went with it. Okay, so you see, the question was more difficult than, let's say, the other one, than the other statement. because it was more difficult, because of some emotions, some thoughts he had, he became uncomfortable. It was a little overwhelming for him. And since it was overwhelming, he did not, essentially there was a rush within that, okay, let me move on. He didn't want to face that discomfort. And that's why he just rushed and didn't spend those extra 10 seconds. If it is a complicated problem, then it makes sense to spend extra time, right? On the other hand, it was a complicated problem, it overwhelmed him and he didn't want to feel uncomfortable. So there was a tendency to rush and so he picked up whatever logic first came to his mind. Okay? So then he thought about it. Oh yeah, the same thing happens with me on CR and RC also. I come across something which is a little complicated and then I have a tendency to rush and then I get questions wrong that I otherwise wouldn't get wrong. This is what he shared at that moment. But yeah, so when I get little overwhelmed, then I have a tendency to rush. Okay, so we could identify that the reason he did not spend those extra 10 seconds, the reason eventually he got that question wrong was that he felt overwhelmed. So that was his trigger point. So his trigger point was an emotional one, that it was a little more complicated, so he felt overwhelmed. It's not that he could not solve it. He could solve it, but it's like it was unexpected. Oh, it's more complicated than I would want it to be. So he felt overwhelmed and then he had a tendency to rush. And then I asked him, okay, but is this insight that you're saying this is what makes you go wrong in CR and RC also? Is this insight you're having for the first time? He said, yes, this is for the first time I'm realizing it. And this guy had been preparing for the GMAT for the last 1.5 years. Now for the first time he is realizing that at least a reasonable trigger, a trigger which makes him go wrong quite often, is essentially this one, that he feels a little overwhelmed and then he has a tendency to rush. So we got to this trigger, or we could have this understanding because we asked a series of whys. If we had not asked those series of whys, we would not have gotten to this understanding. Then the understanding would be, okay, this didn't click me, and okay, I'll be more careful. Okay, I didn't spend 10 extra seconds. Okay, I'll spend 10 extra seconds the next time. The point is, the reason you're not spending those extra 10 seconds is that you're feeling a little overwhelmed. Now, why you're feeling overwhelmed, that's another set of question that I can ask. But even with that understanding, we could understand that, okay, the next time, if he's slightly aware that he's feeling overwhelmed, he can consciously try to slow down, because now he understands that's a trigger point for him. Then I asked him, okay, given that you now understand that that your logic is wrong, would you make an effort to understand why this logic is wrong? He said that no, I generally wouldn't. Okay. And the reason why he normally wouldn't even try to understand why his logic was wrong is that his analysis of his mistakes doesn't even revolve around it. Essentially, the reason he made the mistake was the right thing didn't click him, right? The right, that the first statement had to be done by prime factorization. This idea didn't strike him. That's why he got this question wrong. So in his analysis of his mistake, this thing was not even coming, that one reason he made that mistake was that he applied some incorrect logic, right? But I asked him, okay, that's fine. The right thing didn't strike you, but you went with this logic and you didn't even realize that this logic is wrong, right? What if you had realized that this logic is wrong? Then you wouldn't have continued with it. So one reason you made this mistake is that you didn't even realize that this logic is wrong, right? So now, doesn't it make sense to understand why this logic is wrong? Because if you don't understand, there will always be a tendency to make the same mistake some other time. Then he thought about it, and then probably he made an effort to understand why that logic was wrong. And there was a series of steps there, right? The way he solved statement 1. So there were 2-3 steps essentially in which he went wrong in a big way, but he went wrong. Okay, so there were, let's say, 8 steps. So there were 2-3 main steps essentially in which he went wrong. But the point was to exactly identify those 2-3 steps and not just say, okay, these 8 steps are wrong, I'm done. Again, you are not learning. Okay, we have a lot of tendency to just rush, to say, okay, why I got this question wrong? Because the right thing didn't strike me. Why I got this question wrong? Because I didn't do it the right way. Of course. But whatever way you did, why is that logic wrong? And what exactly is wrong in that logic? It is not that the entire thing is wrong. All the 8 steps are wrong. You have to identify exactly what went wrong. Okay, so this is the way I believe you should go about analyzing your mistakes. It's essentially asking a series of whys. Why is this wrong? And then whatever answer you come up with, why is that? Why did that happen? Why did that go wrong? And all that. Okay, so it's when you ask just one why, a lot of time you'll get a very superficial answer. And if you are getting satisfied with very superficial answer, you are not learning much. As a result, you will not make much progress, even after solving hundreds and thousands of questions. It makes sense to do a few questions, but spend time analyzing your mistakes. Okay, so a lot of your time has to go in analyzing your mistakes. So if you are constantly measuring your productivity by the number of questions you do, then essentially you are measuring your productivity in a flawed way, because then you will always have a tendency to rush. You will not want to spend time analyzing the questions because if you spend time analyzing the question, then you will not end up doing a lot of questions. And since you are measuring your productivity by the number of questions you do, at the end of the day, you will call yourself a failure. Oh, I just did 3 questions today. Okay, so you have to measure yourself by the number of productive hours. Measure yourself by the amount of learning, by the amount of depth you're getting into, not by the number of questions. Because if you do that, that's going to prevent you from digging deeper into your problems. As a result, you may not learn much from the practice you're doing. Thank you.